Welcome back to HashrateUp. Today is all about marathon in Kenya. I sat down with Adam Swick, Chief Growth Officer at Marathon Digital Holdings, the largest public miner that we have today. They recently announced their venture into Kenya. I've been following the progress for a couple of months now. It's definitely in the works for a longer time frame already. I wanted to ask them all about their move and what's to come, what was necessary, and much more. HashrateUp starts now. Enjoy. All right. So, like I said in the brief introduction that Adam didn't hear, I'm back with Adam Swick today. We are at block height 847515. Our 14-day hash rate is at 588 exahashes, and our hash price is at $56 per petahash per day, down from the whatever that was on the weekend frenzy. I think we went above 90 and came back down very quickly to humble everybody down that was running 30 joule per terahash machines. I am interviewing Adam Swick today. He is Chief Growth Officer at Marathon. Adam, do you have the most interesting job in mining? You've got a huge war chest. You're allowed to grow. You're allowed to explore. You're allowed to, do things. Is that a true statement or not?
Yeah, I definitely think I have the best job potentially in the world. It's a lot of fun. Every day is different. It combines a lot of, obviously the topic itself of Bitcoin, helping to secure the network, is something I'm passionate about. But beyond that, it combines a lot of my favorite things from all of my prior jobs, whether it be, the consulting world. I loved jumping from project to project, learning a new thing every month. In the venture capital world, I loved, tackling a new problem every day, working with passionate founders every day. And so all of that variety and constant learning, creating an industry, all comes together in the world of Bitcoin mining, beyond all of the stuff that you normally talk about Bitcoin mining. So working in the space is really special.
What made you end up staying here? Because when you jump from topic to topic as a consultant, can you ever truly become an expert, would you say? Or can you only consult on the top level?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would think that consulting was my first job out of college. And to your point, I learned a little bit about a lot of things. But perhaps the biggest thing I took away from that was learning how to learn fast, and learning how to operate with, 80% of the information and make decisions. Or make recommendations, understand what the must believes are, understand what the biggest risks are. And so it was a lot of those different skills that I think I've tried to bring over to the world of Bitcoin mining, because it's similar. Oftentimes we're operating with imperfect information. I love the space because of how modelable it is. It's all data driven. But we have one major unknown variable, Bitcoin price. We have a second pretty unknown variable of global hash rate. But the rest is kind of charting our own destiny. And so the combination of how data driven it is, a little bit of these unknowns, and kind of an industry that's so brand new relative to so many other industries in the world. I don't know. That's is the people, quite frankly, is the quick answer of what's really kept me around. All those other things are great. But the people is reflecting on everything I've done, the thing that's by far the most important in terms of what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's partially what I'm working on, knowing what topics I get to tackle that day, but it's more who I get to interact with that day, which is really keeps me in the space. And Bitcoin mining is a big world, but also a very small world, full of some really, really great people tackling some really great challenges.
Yeah, because this is on Swan's YouTube channel, right? And a lot of the folks that listen to this might not have been in touch with the industry before, or not as heavy or breathing it as heavily as you and I every day. I'm just gonna dig a bit deeper on the personal questions. What was the first touch point for you in Bitcoin? What made you? What sort of was the first reaction?
Yeah, I've got a fun story there, as most people do. And so I was working in consulting at the time, and I had a friend leaving consulting. So he was choosing between a couple of different jobs. And in order to serve as a sounding board for him as he made that decision, I had to understand what all those companies did. And one of those companies he was considering joining was Coinbase. And so, the other companies, quite frankly, I could understand a little easier what they did. They were just online fintech companies. But Coinbase, he sent it to me, and I really did not understand what they did. And so I had to do a lot of reading, thus sparked an interest. Friend ended up not joining Coinbase. He's currently, I believe, a pastry chef in London. And so went on his own journey. But for me, I'm very thankful to him that he kicked me off on this journey in terms of starting to ask questions. And it went from a personal interest and slowly started taking over my career. It came up a little bit in my consulting days after he left. When Bitcoin price first crossed $1,000, a lot of the banks around the world didn't know what this was. And so who do you call? Your consultants. And you say, what is this? And so quite funny because within the global organization, nobody really knew. And so it often meant me getting on the phone. They'd say, hey, Adam, you have to get on this phone with this bank in Italy and explain what Bitcoin is. And, I was pleased to do that. It came up a little bit in my next job, which was venture capital, in terms of getting to meet with a lot of the companies operating in the space. Largely Bitcoin companies, maybe you could have called them crypto companies back then in terms of them starting to diversify. But really cool to be empowered to meet with all these startups. I truly believe we met with them all because there weren't that many back then. But again, got drawn in by the people in the space. And then jumped in full-time joining Kraken, the exchange. And working in a 24/7, 365 global exchange with people around the world completely blew my mind. It was the coolest thing ever. And eventually found my way to Marathon here and working specifically in Bitcoin mining. And here I was thinking, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency were the confusing things and energy was easy. But I think I was mistaken there because energy continues to blow my mind every day. And so sitting at the intersection of these two awesome worlds, energy and cryptocurrency, is, again, what keeps me here today.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, energy is a rabbit hole in and of itself, and I'm kind of glad I chose that study, like that field of study. At some point, I just wanted to understand what happens behind the plug, right? And it paid off huge time because it just gave me an angle on Bitcoin mining, and I could understand it much more quick than maybe the average Bitcoiner can with the energy background. So yeah, I definitely hear you. It's curious that you say as soon as it crossed $1,000, banks were like, "Hey, what is this?" I would have thought that they maybe got interested a lot later than that. But hey, there might be some smart people working.
Yeah, initial questions. It crossed $1,000. I think it therefore made it into a good number of headlines, and I'm sure it popped up a little bit. I can't say they were diving in head first as much as they were saying, can someone talk to me about this for 10 minutes and then I'm going to forget about it. And so anyway, you saw blips of interest popping up.
Did you start as growth officer, chief growth officer? No. What was your first?
Yeah, at Marathon, I joined as VP of strategy. And so, I think it was the 9th person to join this crazy big public mining company. And so joined doing a little bit of everything. One of the reasons I was drawn to Marathon was the startup culture we had in terms of no defined lines, no attitudes of not my job. Instead, it was everyone together, rowing in the same direction, doing whatever was needed that day. And so today we've grown to over 100 people. I've shifted over to Chief Growth Officer, which has been super fun. And myself tackling more and more every day, the company doing far more than I ever could imagine when I joined a little over 2.5 years ago. How far we've come, both in terms of the basic stats like exahash, Bitcoin on the balance sheet, things like that. But in terms of being able to look more forward and investing in the future, thinking about the future, which plays into geographies we're focused on, technologies we're investing in, mining modalities we're tackling. It's night and day. And again, one of the reasons I love this space is I feel like how far Marathon's come over the 2.5 years I've been here would take a normal company, 25, 50 years to move that far, if they even could.
TikTok next block, right? There's a different speed.
Indeed.
And that's very refreshing. I say that to my wife all the time also. It's very refreshing to work in this space because everybody sort of is driven by professionalism and wanting to keep their reputation up because that's what they know matters at the end of the day. But then also getting things done quickly and getting through the steps quickly because they know, every block that they get on quicker, they make extra money. And it's directly linked to your speed of execution almost, right? I know when Fred speaks that there's sort of a clear vision where mining is going. I would love to explore that with you a little bit before we sort of understand why Africa and why Kenya specifically. Do you want to lay that out for people a bit more? Where do you see mining going in sort of 5-10 years? What does mining look like?
Yeah, I think the short answer there is mining has to switch from being a customer of power to being a partner of power, and choosing those words very intentionally. And those words are doing a lot of heavy lifting, but it's a pretty major difference and a pretty big shift when you think about it. Is looking back, the way big miners have functioned is looking around the world, often in Texas, finding where you could build multi-100 megawatt sites, and doing that. Basically calling the utility company saying, "Hello, I'd like 200 megawatts of power. Thanks." And that was the transaction. Granted, which is perfectly okay because the space was new and we were figuring things out. But it's evolved very quickly, as we just mentioned. And so, A, with halvings coming, B, with just increased competition in global hash rate, that I don't think is no longer competitive. No longer is it competitive to call the utility and say, "Hello, I'd like 200 megawatts of power, please." Instead, you have to just shift the framing to finding problems and solving those problems, energy problems. And that's big. So what do I mean by that? It could be, the problem could be grid balancing. It could be, which ERCOT in Texas has a lot of, helping the miners turn on and off to help balance the grid, just like gas plants turn on and off to help balance the grid. It could be things, again, balancing the grid like Marathon has done with our joint venture in the UAE, where in Abu Dhabi, they use huge amounts of electricity during the summer to run their air conditioners and not so much electricity during the not hot summer days because those air conditioners aren't running. And so you have that unused generation. What can you do with that? You can Bitcoin mine. And when those air conditioners need to turn on a hot summer day, the Bitcoin miners can turn off. And so grid balancing is one problem that we can solve. A second one could be stranded or excess energy. And so you look at Paraguay, which has tons of hydropower and this credible natural resource they were given, but no immediate use for it. And so who can move in very quickly and start to use some of those unused electrons? Bitcoin miners. You think about stranded flare gas. Again, who can go out into the middle of nowhere to use energy from gas that might otherwise just be wasted by lighting on fire? Bitcoin miners. And so again, a small shift. And so the implications of that are potentially more decentralized, both around the globe and to smaller sites, whether it be flare gas or landfills or organic waste. And last piece is solving problems both with the energy side, but also the heat, because that's another thing that we are good at is making heat. And so suddenly if you find ways to heat greenhouses, heat shrimp farms, heat water that can be used in industrial processes, all of those things that I just described are much more competitive than, "Hello, utility, I'd like to buy 200 megawatts of power." And so that's where I think the future is headed, is instead of us being a customer saying, "We'd like to buy some power," it's flipping that narrative and saying, "What's your problem and how are we uniquely situated to solve it?"
Yeah, perfect. Why do you think there is not that much mining going on in Africa today outside of Ethiopia?
I think just newness. I mean, you could have asked the question a couple of years ago: why is there not much mining going on anywhere but Texas? And the industry is growing and learning. Part of it, it's a push and a pull. Part of it is miners becoming more sophisticated, having the resources, switching from 9 people to 100 people, and having the resources to look around the globe. And part of it is forced. These halvings are forcing people to be more economical, forcing people to find more attractive sites, forcing people to be partners rather than customers of these mining sites. And Africa, the whole world has energy problems, but Africa specifically has some unique energy problems that could be uniquely solved by Bitcoin miners.
Yeah, interesting. The last Africa Bitcoin Mining Summit, the first one in Nairobi that we did last year, was all around that. And I remember your team, pitching up with I think 3 representatives. Jim was there, Raymond was there, your policy guy who was in Washington, I forget his name. Jason was there, and that was already sort of, to me, a huge sign, that those guys showed up and represented the company, wanted to learn and peek behind the curtain and see what there is to do. Is that also like partnerships with Gridless or other companies? Does that also inform your decision making as to which countries you go into first? What is necessary for you guys to say, hey, we're going to explore doing this more? Why was it not Angola, for instance, or any other country?
Yeah, I mean, partially the ones that we happen to learn about first, and partially the ones where the opportunities seem the best on paper. It's partially paper research driven and partially people driven, to your point. Finding the most attractive opportunities while mitigating risk. And so what we're doing is not, insane rocket science in terms of trying to make sure that we're in locations where we reduce risk via having faith in the rule of law, having faith in the geography and climate, having faith in the electrical infrastructure, and knowing what we're getting into. And then beyond that, trying to find ways to reduce our operating costs, which is primarily driven by the electricity price. And there it's all about, again, being partners is the big focus. And so if I greatly oversimplify what I think is going on in Africa is, there's huge population growth, huge business growth, huge ambitions all over the place. To feed all of that, you need huge electricity consumption. And so I think people understand that. And so what's happening is there's tons of electrical generation projects being built all over Africa, which is awesome because they're setting themselves up for success in the future. However, if you have these great growth ambitions from population, business, and otherwise, are you going to size those, electrical projects for demand today? Or are you going to size those electrical projects for what you hope demand is in 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road? You're going to size it for the future. And so that's what's happened. But if you're growing rapidly, there's going to be a big gap between where you are and where you're going to be in the future. And so what do you do with those electrons is the short answer. And again, we think Bitcoin mining could be the answer. Digital asset data centers, that's very oversimplifying and lumping the intricacies of an entire continent into one. But that was the initial hypothesis that had us kind of peak our ears up. And as we've showed up and learned a lot more, we're starting to put all the pieces all together and understand specific regions or areas that really jump out at us under that initial broad narrative that we started with.
Yeah, I want to get into that a bit more in a second. But before we do that, Adam, maybe describe for the audience quickly what actually is Marathon doing in Kenya today. What were those papers that were signed? Let's maybe sum that up a little bit for somebody who wasn't on Twitter.
Sure. So I had the pleasure of being able to enter into a memorandum of understanding with Kenya to jointly try to identify and develop digital asset data center sites within the country. And so this was us off of our success in the United States, off of Bitcoin mining success and balancing the grid in Texas, off of the joint venture success in the UAE, off of successes in Paraguay, being able to, switch from a bottoms up approach of finding a specific plot of land in a specific site to almost doing the opposite in this case, of starting from the top down, the highest levels of government, explaining what benefits we think we can bring to the country, to the grid, optimizing every electron, whether that be optimizing economically and making sure that no electron goes wasted from a dollar perspective, and optimizing in terms of how the electrons flow by balancing things. Clearly explaining all the benefits we think we can bring. And, the Kenya leadership got it. I mean, they understood the problems the challenges they were facing with either spare electrons that were not going monetized or balancing issues. And they recognized that digital asset data centers could be the solution. And so it was officially embarking on a journey to try to identify where we could be most helpful across the entire country. And so kind of a top-down mandate, which is incredibly exciting. Again, to switch from this bottoms-up nitty-gritty approach of being a customer to now this top-down partnership approach. And so very simply, the idea is to try to find win-win scenarios where there is some sort of electron issue that digital asset data centers are uniquely positioned to fix. And that's what we want to do in a very rapid way.
And what are the most low-hanging fruit in that sense when it comes to setting up a first potential pilot under that memorandum of understanding? Is it just stranded power at a substation? Is it a wind farm? What do you guys envision today?
Yeah, all of those. I think it's looking at the overall grid and trying to understand where there is imbalances of generation and demand. So that could be, excess hydro in some region that could use an off-taker. I think it's number 2, supporting new electrical generation build-outs, whether that be wind or solar, geothermal. And I had a really smart third one that I was going to end with, but I'm blanking on it now. And so, the third piece is oftentimes I get the sense there's transmission constraints. And so generation is plentiful, but getting it to where it needs to be is often the hardest part. I mean, it's the same story all over the world. And so, while you wait for transmission to be built out, or while you look for how to pay for that build out, again, digital asset data centers can be that answer.
Can you speak to the potential there in terms of megawatt? Or maybe let me ask differently. What went into the decision-making process of saying, yes, we want to do this?
I can't speak to the potential because it's limitless. This is, again, extremely exciting to work with a country, and that's not said lightly, working with a country that understands the benefits that Bitcoin mining can bring to it. I mean, how do you put that potential into words? We can try in megawatts, but I would hope we're only underselling ourselves there. And so, it was, how do we decide to commit to this? It was kind of a no-brainer. If you have a government from the very top down that is excited by this, that is excited about being a champion for this, that recognizes that this is Bitcoin mining is a unique solution. Nothing else can do this. Nothing else is as modular, can scale up and come down. Nothing else is as interruptible. Can you turn the power on and off? Nothing else is as location agnostic in terms of, doesn't require high-speed fiber. So it's really a win-win, and I hope other countries around the world are recognizing this, and we'll continue to do the bottoms up too, where we're looking around the world for the most attractive sites. But I think what you'll see is top-down governments, big corporations, big electrical companies starting to identify this too, and starting to proactively reach out because, again, it's a win-win situation. It's, yes, we're hoping to increase hash rate and secure the Bitcoin blockchain to an enhanced degree, but the other side's also benefiting, whether it be through dollars or balanced grids or using underutilized resources. And so if it is a win-win, why wait for us to find you when you can find us?
Yeah, I almost want to say, and I hope it doesn't come across bad, the securitization of the network becomes a side effect at one zettahash, where the most important aspect of a project is now, delivering stability in the grid for an entire section of a country, or having stable access to power, or unlocking finance, or mitigating greenhouse emissions through flared gas mining and stuff like that, right? At some point, the network is big enough. And I always ask the question at the end of every show, and we'll get there. If Bitcoin consumes enough energy, and I don't think it will ever, because there's always a project out there that would benefit from Bitcoin mining, right? Do you particularly, or do you personally work with the Kenyan government on this stuff, or is there a specific team within Marathon that is only Kenya focused now? How is that structured internally?
Yeah, we have numerous people working with the Kenyan government. It's definitely a cross-functional effort, meaning we're putting a lot of resources behind it. And so it's involving people like our government affairs team, which is involved with the U.S. government, but kind of governments around the world, helping to navigate all of that complex web of how governments interact. It is involving our international team, which, given Marathon's heavy international presence, very fortunate to have a team specifically focused on outside the United States. It involves the growth team and the strategy team, trying to model and drive this economic value and make sure that win-win exists. It involves operations teams to understand the unique specifics of the electrical grid in Kenya, and down to hertz and volts and all that good stuff, and making sure that we're properly prepared to build when we say we want to build. So it's a long list of people involved, but the good news is it's an equally long list of folks involved from the Kenyan side as well. Again, showing that commitment.
Yeah, that's really great to hear, because there's always that sort of high level, very shiny handshake announcements, documents being signed, and then there's that, let's sit down at a table and do some work. Let's look at a map and look at substations and look at voltages and look at this and look at that. And you need to have experts on both sides, right? That know what to do and can help make informed decisions.
Yeah, and that's the nice part is, again, to oversimplify, they get it. And so this would be very different if you're trying to, force something that somebody doesn't want. But again, everybody wants this. And so it's much easier when everybody sees the benefit that they're about to have. And everybody's transparent about how this could work, and they understand the future vision. Now it's just getting there. Understanding the vision's sometimes the hardest part, but people get that, and Kenya got it way quicker than I think a lot of the other countries around the world have gotten it, as they're on their journeys to hopefully try to get it.
Yeah, with Africa especially, there's always this leapfrogging aspect too, right? I mean, Ethiopia now has, I think, more than 500 megawatts of mining running, and I would be very surprised if other nations in Africa weren't looking at that and saying, hey, we also have a lot of hydropower. We also have a lot of instability. There's a bunch of money to be made there for our infrastructure. We can attract entire industries from around the globe, bring in expertise. Like, there's just so much benefit there. And I'd be very surprised if they didn't see that. They see the Kenyan government signing MOUs with large American corporations. They see miners from all over going to Ethiopia. It's almost a suddenly moment. Bitcoin is 15 years old, 16 years old, and now there's nation state deals being signed. It's almost surreal in a way.
Yeah, and I think it's going to continue to be that way. Is obviously there's a ton of hard work to be done. There's a ton of hard work that has been done in terms of standing on the shoulders of giants that came before you. But this is going to happen quicker than I think people expect. Obviously, I don't know your experience, but everybody said AI was going to happen quicker than you expect, and things like ChatGPT and Copilot and all those really blow my mind, quite frankly, in terms of a year or two ago we weren't even thinking about them. That's the closest analogy I think I can bring to what I think is going to happen with Bitcoin mining in terms of adoption and interest by governments, corporations, individual power generation sites, everything in between. I think it's going to be people looking at their neighbors, like you said, asking some questions, and from there it goes very, very fast.
Yeah, I mean, even where I am in South Africa, there's lots of power issues. There's lots of benefits to be had here as well. I've said this on a podcast before. People who listen regularly will maybe roll their eyes. I hope not. But there's this thesis, of Africa's power generation and distribution being decentralized and moving away from sort of the top down. We generate at one giant facility and then we distribute, because I simply think Africa is too large of a continent, it's too vast to have large interconnected grid systems like we see in the Europe and the Western world. And all of these mini grids, all of these sort of low, medium voltage mini grids that could potentially be built need Bitcoin mining to balance themselves, right? There's this great story that Eric from Gridless once told me, is where one of their sites basically had a giant heating element, like a 50 kilowatt heating element, sunk in the forebay of the hydro dam, just to balance the grid with that. And they said, yeah, you can turn that off. We'll take the power gladly. And you'll get something in return as well. It's a no-brainer, right? And once private folks understand that, it's off to the races. Now, I'd be curious to understand how you see that. Do you sort of see, and again with the Kenyan aspect, do you see more of this sort of large-scale infrastructure? We put 50 megs of M30S machines on a substation and ramp them up and down to balance the grid in a big way? Or do you see, potentially also private mini grids benefiting from the partnership that you guys have engaged?
Yeah, everything. And then again, that's one of the reasons I love this is no matter the problem, there's an optimal solution that's very data driven. And so to your point, if you say, hey, we're having 200 megawatt swings in the grid between peak and bottom demand. So here's the demand curve and how many megawatt hours we think you can anticipate using. To your point, all right, maybe we're going to build a large farm there, turn it on and off. I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, if you talk to someone and they say, hey, we built a solar farm, it's got too much power for 6 hours a day, but that's it. No batteries. You'd pick older miners there, but that's a different solution. And so all of these things are extremely modelable once you understand the problem in terms of how much power, when, et cetera, this is new that we can do this, because suddenly we have really cutting edge machines and we have somewhat older machines and we have really older machines. In 2017, all you had was new ASICs. There was no such thing as like an older ASIC that you might want to park somewhere and run it for just 4 or 6 hours a day. But now we do. And so we have expensive top of the line machines, and we have medium machines, and we have cheap, not very efficient machines. And so these are all just extra tools in our tool bag. Similar, just as technology has continued to evolve, like firmware is another big one. In 2019, your machines were on or off. It was a 1 or a 0. Whereas today, thanks to firmware, you can have 0, 0.1, 0.5, 1.6, and everything in between. And so, the tools that we can use are growing every day, which is, again, perfect timing as we're shifting from being customers to partners, because it means that whatever the problem is, we can design something for it through a combination of ASIC choice, firmware usage, cooling modality, whether it be air-cooled, hydro-cooled, single-phase immersion, dual-phase immersion. Again, these all have their strengths and where they're perfectly suited. And so that's what we're focused on, is continuing to arm our tool bag with as many tools as possible so that, again, whenever problem you throw at us, we're like, yeah, here's the solution.
And do you see Marathon keeping up the sort of not pressure, but the focus on vertical integration for all of these different aspects? Because, now mining will move even further to the fringes of energy systems. You will need even more specialized solutions. Do you see yourselves, I don't know, coming up with your own network infrastructure hardware and vertically or building that stuff as well as it becomes more necessary? Or is it just, do you partner with folks on that now?
It's a constant question to like build, buy, or partner for all of these things. Two-phase immersion is a perfect example. It's an example of something. I'm sure lots of people in Marathon have their own story of how our two-phase immersion tank came to be. But my experience was as we started to look forward to this future of decentralized mining, you recognize that no longer, if you have a 5 megawatt mining site in the middle of nowhere on a landfill, it doesn't make sense to have a team staffed there 24/7. When historically all of our sites were multi-hundred megawatt sites with teams staffed there 24/7. And so, looking ahead to that future, it was about how can we create something that you don't have to blow the dust off, clean bugs out every so often, et cetera, et cetera. And single phase immersion was partially all the way there, but nobody was doing two-phase immersion in a way that we wanted it. And so definitely surveyed the landscape and decided we need something better and we can do something better. And so from there, went through the whole evaluation of build, buy, partner, and the answer was build. And we'll continue to evaluate that on every step that we go through the process. So Auradine was kind of a hybrid. This was an investment, but working very closely with a partner. It was exciting to develop ASICs with them built in the United States. And so there's examples of all of those, and there will continue to be examples of all of those moving forward. But the goal is just to increase our optionality and our agility in the number of tools in our toolbox.
How do you see the risk reward and CapEx angle when it comes to two-phase immersion? Is that going to be a standard going forward?
It's looking pretty compelling, is the quick answer. When you looked at the cost benefit analysis, the benefits were extremely clear. And then quite frankly, you were like, all right, now I'm really excited by all these benefits. Hit me with the cost. And you look at the cost and it's not what you expect. It's much cheaper than you think.
Really?
On a lot of dimensions. Yes, I don't have it off the top of my head. So I'm sure it's on our website. And there's better people more informed, but it's very much trending in the direction where it's going to be a no-brainer.
Really? Okay. I might have to have Marathon on for a third time just for the topic, because my angle was always, this is super expensive. It's super difficult to do from a technical perspective, and for longevity also. Like, you cannot have these things last for 3 years. They have to last for 15.
Yep, that's the exact. I mean, to your point, this is what we went into it thinking. And that's why we said we have to do this ourselves, is to make sure we address all these things, both the longevity. Again, I didn't close that train of thought, but the goal of two-phase is that you can set it and check it a couple times a year, and it just hums along happily without your intervention. So it empowers those landfill sites, as I mentioned, that might be in the middle of nowhere, and many others. It also really increases your ability to capture your heat and heat water and do things like that. And so both from a maintenance perspective, from a capturing the heat perspective, from again, giving you more tools in your toolbox, being able to really push machines to the limit of these things, keep machines really cool, operate in harsher environments in the middle of the day when other cooling modalities might not be able to do that. It checks a lot of boxes. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend we can get some of our, we refer to it as two-pick, two-phase immersion cooling, 2PIC folks on, because I think you'll be highly impressed.
Nice. Adam, AI, you already mentioned it. Is that something you guys are looking at from a growth perspective at all, or not? Why yes, why no?
Yeah, something we're definitely leveraging internally in terms of our day-to-day operations. In terms of owning GPUs, something we've continued to be monitoring and staying very close to, as we have been, quite frankly, since I started, and so probably even before that. It's a fascinating space that's developed extremely quickly. I think a lot of people are going about it the right way. I think a lot of people are going about it the wrong way. And so we have learned a lot. You'll see us start to interact with it in some, for example, two-phase immersion can easily be used by GPUs. And so, just like our two-phase immersion tanks were selfishly built for us for Bitcoin mining, but can easily be used for any traditional data center application. And so there's one place where you'll already see us starting to interact with that world and trying to find the best way to maximize value, and always asking ourselves in terms of gold, sell pickaxes, et cetera, thinking through things like that, understanding what the needs are of the market, and understand what we're unfairly good at. And we've got several ideas. Also cautionary, looking out for bubble type scenarios, recognize that partnerships and who you work with is incredibly important. So anyway, things we're staying extremely close with.
Would you, and I'm very torn and split on this, would you say that AI competes with Bitcoin mining, or would you say that AI needs Bitcoin mining? Where are you on that?
It's a bit of both. Like we can compete only on a small subset of places. So we compete in that we're both using compute. They're using AI compute. We're doing digital asset compute. We both need power. We both need cooling. However, the base level needs, they have a much longer list in terms of oftentimes requiring water, oftentimes requiring high speed fiber. Being very particular about what they need. And so we bump into them when we're looking at sites, if those sites have a lot of those things. However, there's a lot of sites that don't have all of those things. There's a lot of problems in the world. That is one of the reasons I think, taking it back to Kenya, in Kenya, we're asking, what problems do you have? How can we fix them? No, we don't have to say, what problems do you have with access to water that's near a large city that has high-speed fiber and can guarantee around 99% uptime? We'd love to fix those problems for you. Instead, it's kind of like, what problems do you have? We can fix those. It's a much different minimal requirement. And so from that aspect, somewhat compete, somewhat don't. But I think also need us in the sense of the mining industry has, they're really good at this, what they do. They're really good at finding sites, finding those symbiotic relationships, building a data center extremely quickly, and operating it with incredible effectiveness. And so, where every minute is, you can assign dollar value to every minute you were down, how much you lost. And so I think traditional data center world is glancing over at Bitcoin mining world and saying like, oh, they're onto some things. And so the answer is yes to both your questions.
Is there any aspiration for a country like Kenya? Have they voiced aspirations to have their own AI data centers that you could potentially help them with as well?
Yeah, not that I've heard, that I've been in the room for. I can't imagine, just hypothetically, that every country in the world will probably have ambitions. At some point, all this stuff just becomes a part of national security. Bitcoin, similarly, if you don't have any Bitcoin miners in your country, there is a world where the world decides to cut your country out of the network. I imagine that extends to AI as well. In terms of making sure your data is where you want it to be, is being used for where you want it to be. And so at some point, I think every country around the world, we've been talking a lot about from the electrical optimization perspective, but from like I think the national security team in every country is also going to pop up at some point and say, we actually need some mining, some AI, some this, we need our own silicon chip manufacturing. Like there's the list of must-haves that you must, in the past it was, food, water, oil, energy. But people are starting to realize that there's a longer list of things that every country should probably have.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. I wish it was more true for my home country. It's curious to me that a country like Kenya realizes that they need Bitcoin mining and they understand it so fundamentally, as you have said. Compared to other countries, they're just so much more quick. And I'd be curious. I don't think you can distill it into a sort of 5 to 10 minute answer, but maybe hint at what it is that you think makes them so open to it, or makes it so that they're so welcoming to the idea of inviting Bitcoin mining into their country. I don't know. Is there something you can answer to that question? It's not really a question. It's more of a
Yeah, I mean, to give people the grace and benefit of the doubt is to the start of our conversation is Bitcoin on the one hand is super simple, but when you start going down the rabbit hole, it becomes very deep and very complex. So that's confusing, and energy is very confusing. And so sitting at the intersection of those two is beyond confusing. And so I can understand why regulators, corporations get confused by this space. Is it's intimidating, and it's for some it may be intimidating. For some, when you just scratch the surface, you think you get it, but again, until you really take the time to peel back the layers, then do you really understand it? So I'd say that's the foundational, fundamental thing: is just taking the time to listen and learn, which is hard because everybody's very busy in the world. And if you're running a country, you have a lot of things going on. And so it's just a matter of priorities and prioritizing, taking a step back to think about, what can Bitcoin mining do for my country, whether it be, increase economics of projects, whether it be balance the grid, whether it be the national security concern of making sure that you can transact on this network. There's a long list. And for different countries, for different corporations, some of those are going to be priorities and some of those aren't. But I think where it's shifting is it used to not be on everybody's list. Now it's on everybody's list. It's just a matter of where it is on the list. But I think the shifting we're having now is it could be number 2 on people's lists or number 200 on people's lists. People realize it's going to come up to number 2 at some point in the next couple of decades.
yeah.
And so can you afford to not act today is a big shift from, oh, this is too risky to start participating in, to it's very quickly becoming, this is too risky not to participate in.
Yeah, or can you afford to keep it on that low position on your list while everybody else is sort of dabbling it and using it and adding value to their societies? What was speed like, Adam, with this? Like, was there a quick back and forth? Because government can sometimes be very slow, right? So what was your experience there? Was it very easy to deal with folks? Did it take time? Did it take follow-ups? What was that like?
Yeah, it took time, but it was easy. I mean, it wasn't, the Kenya government was absolutely pleasurable to work with. Every person we worked with from energy companies was extremely welcoming. And again, extremely open to learning. That was the key fundamental thing. Extremely open to hearing what we had to say and then actively listening and asking questions. It's so easy to take a pitch and nod and then hang up. It's a different level of engagement to hear someone describe what they do and then ask questions about, all right, how does this actually impact what I do? Here's my specific role. How does this actually impact that? Those were what the conversations that happened. So there were several of those. But I'd much rather have it take time with meaningful conversations and learning than it be quick without those.
And is there any fear that government changes and it sort of, I don't know, prohibits this from moving forward?
I mean, I guess it's technically on the list of concerns, but I mean, I think it's to the point that, how does a new government come in? Like, what do you say to this? What do you say to, we're improving the operations of our grid, we're getting more money for unused electrons. Like, how do you decide that, never mind, we don't want those things?
Yeah, look, I mean, hypothetical, right? IMF comes in and says, yeah, you're very positive when it comes to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining in your country. That loan you're looking for, let's maybe put that on hold for a minute. That would be one very easy way,
Yeah.
To put pressure on a country like Kenya, I think.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point in terms of external factors coming in and trying to put their finger on the scale. I mean, yes, that's a risk. That's a risk everywhere. Individual sites in getting financing for that and approvals for that. I mean, this is something that I think we just have to wrestle with as a Bitcoin industry. And so that's always on the risk list, always something we're trying to mitigate. And yeah, you can mitigate it and try to address it on a situation by situation, but you also have to address it just from a macro perspective. And that's what we're trying to do is, as miners, recognizing that anything that increases usage and adoption of the Bitcoin blockchain is good for us. And so that's why we have a pretty large government affairs team keeping track of what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world and trying to be proactive there. This is going to take work from the entire Bitcoin community, but it's being done, and it's being done well.
Nice. Is there any engagement, Adam, with private organizations on the ground in Kenya that might benefit from this? I'm thinking private hydro developers, for instance, that could build out sites that they previously wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, we've met with numerous private companies across the continent. And so it's both. It's all of the above, because everything we've been talking about specific to governments, to your point, is similar to private companies. And so that's our approach around the globe is, again, solving problems for anyone. Because the energy world, to our prior points, is super complicated. And so what might be a public service one place might be a private service another place, but the problem's still the same. And so it's interesting. Some places the private corporations move quick. Some places the public organizations move quicker. But we're engaging with them all around the world.
What excites you most right now, Adam, when it comes to Bitcoin mining around the world? Is it two-phase immersion, nation-state adoption? What is it right now in your chair?
Yeah, it's a long list. Those are up there. I think it's this innovation, which is a big word, but innovation in the mining space. Again, this shift from the big, huge data centers, which are still great, but now to opening our eyes to, wow, we can do a lot more. We can bring good into the world more than just securing the Bitcoin blockchain, by leaning more into the energy side of things, by using the excess energy, by using stranded gas, by locating on landfills, by doing stuff with our heat reuse. It's what excites me is I joined Marathon to. This sounds stupid, but I felt really good waking up every day knowing that I was doing something to secure the Bitcoin blockchain.
No, that's not stupid.
Spend my day in. I spend my day in PowerPoint and Excel and stuff like that. So what is Adam doing? But it does get me out of bed every day.
Adam, I'm
genuinely
with you 100%. Every machine that I sell, every hosting deal that goes through, every sort of piece of education that you do for this show, or is it in private conversation, all of that leads to potentially more mining, right? And you could argue that all of this work that I'm doing also kind of secures the blockchain in a way, right?
Yeah.
Or at least leads to more of that, more energy being spent on that. So I'm fully with you on that.
Yeah. And so that's where I started. And so what excites me is, again, all this apart from the energy aspect in terms of, wow, it's not a choose between these, help the world's energy problems or help secure the Bitcoin blockchain. It's both. And that really blew my mind. And so securing the Bitcoin blockchain was enough to get me out of bed every morning. But now that I can do that and these other things, that's what has me jumping out of bed every morning.
That's, I think, a very good close, Adam. I cannot close on that though. Is there anything that you wish I had asked but haven't? Anything that you wanted to highlight about Kenya that we haven't covered?
No, this was a great conversation. Again, I hope that the big takeaway here is that more dominoes will fall very quickly, both on the country side, both on the private company side. I think, as an industry, what I'm learning is to just meet people where they are. Let's make up an example. some landfills, what we want to speak to, are fascinated by Bitcoin. And we're like, hey, we can, instead of you paying to be compliant by having a flare, we can pay you to be compliant by taking the methane and turning it into Bitcoin. And that fascinates them. They want to learn about what we're doing, and they want to be paid with a share of the Bitcoin. Other landfills, they're like, I don't care. I don't know what you're doing. I don't care what you're doing. Just pay me, half a cent a kilowatt hour and leave me alone. And which one of those rooms you're walking into is very different how you have to present yourself. And so take that one simple example and magnify it to the entire world across beyond just landfills to flares to energy companies to private companies. So that's a big thing that I've been thinking about recently. Again, I think the industry is wrestling with too. That's going to take us to the next level. I'm very proud Bitcoiner and all of those things, and love seeing its praises, but also recognizing that we're going to have to be chameleons of sorts in terms of speaking the language of those around us. So that's, another thing that's been top of mind, which I hope everybody can help with, again, as we spread the usage and adoption of Bitcoin.
Does Bitcoin consume enough electricity, Adam? Yes or no?
Nope. Nope. And to your point, I don't think it ever will. There are, until every energy problem, which is a very broad term, is solved, then no, it does not.
Where do people find you if they have more questions around Kenya? Where do they connect with Mara? Give people a bit of a handoff maybe as to where to go next.
Sure, of course. So to find Marathon, you can find us at mara.com, MARA.com. You can find us on Twitter or X or most social places, I think, at MarathonDH, at Marathon Digital Holdings is what that stands for, at MarathonDH. You can find me specifically on Twitter X. My handle's at SwickTalk, at SWICK Talk, TALK. DMs are open, so feel free to shoot me any ideas, reactions to all this stuff. I love hearing from folks.
Thanks, Adam, for all your time. I hope I shone a bit of a spotlight where there was already one on the Bitcoin and Marathon and Kenya story. I know sometimes it can sort of just be this wild announcement piece and presidents shaking hands with CEOs. But I was curious to learn more about what was happening right now on the ground and peek behind the curtain. Thank you, Adam, for letting me do that and for letting my audience do that as well. Guys, if you have questions, as he said, DMs are open. Feel free to bombard him there. He cannot blame me now that he's said that himself. Next Sunday, we'll speak mining again. I hope you learned something new. Please comment under the videos or on Twitter X, like as you prefer. On YouTube, it's become unuseful. It's so many bots. It's a bit crazy and unfortunate, but we have other channels to ask questions. Again, if you learned something new, you know what to do. I'll see you next Sunday. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.